Right, welcome to the FP&AI Podcast. Today I've got a special guest, Yaseen Enos, on the line. Welcome, Yaseen.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking about something different. You're a chartered accountant and you've made a leap into the tech world as a specialist, FP&A specialist, SME, subject matter expert. And we're going to just be exploring about how you got here, what do you do, going from a CA to being a specialist in this field, and the pros and the cons. And we just want to explore your story today. It's all about you. For the listeners, I have met with Yaseen. He's got a very similar story to mine, actually. So I'm going to be hopefully also sharing some of my story as we go. And tomorrow the Boca are playing. That's why I'm in the shirt. So I hope you're supporting the Boca there, Yaseen. We're playing Argentina, obviously, and hopefully we're going to win. But let's get on with this podcast. And just tell us, Yaseen, you're from a company called Flash, and it's part of the Pepcore group of companies. But just tell us a little bit about what Flash does.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So Flash is a Fintech company. We're part of the Pepcore group. I think we the Fintech arm of Pepcore. So what we do is we offer a couple of sort of like services to small like traders. I think that is our core business. For those of you who don't know what a trader is, it's like, when you go to your spaza shop that's sitting on the corner, etc., right? And you want to go and buy airtime or electricity or even just pay your DSTV bill, etc. You'd see a lot of these shops have these devices which they use for like card payments, or they use to like sell you the electricity or sell you the airtime, etc. So that's sort of like the core, I would say, area of our business. We do other services as well. So we enable these traders to sort of like do payments for their suppliers. So when they buy breads or cool drinks or other supplies from the bigger suppliers, we enable them to be able to pay these suppliers through our platform as well. And then like things like card acquiring, so enable them to allow customers to purchase using bank cards. That is also one of the services we offer.
How many customers would you have on the platform?
On that side of the business, it's about ranges between like plus minus 170,000 customers. We're across South Africa. And we're not the only, obviously, players in that area as well. We have a couple of competitors, which is obviously good because obviously competition drives innovation.
Great, thanks for that. And just before we go into detail about what you do, let's describe it at a very high level. Try tell the listeners what you do. You're a chartered accountant, but you don't create financials, you don't audit, you don't sign checks.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of stuff you don't do. What do you do?
I don't do a lot of those things. So, I'm a chartered accountant, like you mentioned. I followed, by and large, the traditional chartered accountant who did articles and became qualified, became a CA, etc. But right now, what I do is sort of like I specialize in sort of FP&A automations and financial process automations. Something like financial transformations would sort of also fall under that umbrella. And typically on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week, month-to-month, my core function is really looking at like, let's take the FP&A process, which involves like financial analytics, reporting, planning, which includes the budgeting, forecasting cycle and that. Sort of like automating those processes, but also like producing the outputs of those processes as well. So building systems, implementing new systems, etc., to like automate and produce analytics and reports from that process.
And who do you work with, and who do you work for?
Yeah. So the key stakeholders for that function would be the head of finance itself, who is sort of my boss, one of my bosses. The head of FP&A, which is my other boss. He's both head of FP&A and data. So because they ultimately sit in the boardrooms with the directors and need to feed back on terms of how the company is doing, are we meeting our targets, etc. So that is sort of our key stakeholder in terms of like what of what we need to deliver. The people we work closely with is actually with business. So we work with the analysts in the various teams, and this is finance analysts. These are commercial analysts, sales managers, etc. I work with HR quite closely as well. So this is to help them also get involved in the process for planning. So when human resource department needs to basically plan headcount, I'll be involved in that process because I need to kind of like create the automation for and make it easy for them to sort of do the planning and how the planning integrates with the other side of what the rest of the business in terms of their financial planning, making sure that the sales management team, their planning is making it easy for them to plan accurately and complete, and that their planning is also integrated with the rest of the business and so forth. So it's like with various parts of the business. So we work across the business, but ultimately, like the results of our work always goes upwards to like to the executive directors because they need to make the decisions based on the outcome of our work.
So when you say planning, you're working with people who plan. So be it in commercial, sales, marketing, human capital. Imagine on the supply side, there's some degree of planning. And of course, that always rolls up into a financial plan, which your bosses then show the exec and they make those decisions, right? So you're rolling up the plans, and you're probably also getting the historical data in as well, because that's part and parcel of planning. So you're that intersection where the historical data is coming in and you're looking forward.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Yes.
Okay, so Yaseen, how did you get to this role? And we'll unpack in more detail the tools and the processes and the projects and the things that you do on a daily basis. But how did you get to this role?
Yeah. So my journey was actually quite interesting because I used to be a finance analyst back at my previous company at Woolworths. My exposure to there was really, I was the guy working in the Excel spreadsheets, building these complex financial models in one of the divisions, and we planned our side of the business, right? And then there would be someone else that would then take these plans, consolidate them together to create a financial plan for the broader group. The challenge that I dealt with, and many others in equivalent roles, is that like it's very, very manual. You need to pull in. You spoke about like getting that historical data in, so you need to pull data off systems. You need to build the drivers. In every iteration, you have to build a new financial model. And then sort of like it was very, very manual intensive, to the point where the more complex or the more driver based you want to make your planning, let's put it that way, there's less opportunity for you to actually analyze the outcome. And I think for me, the challenge was always that, like, I was producing the plans and I was getting these things approved by business, etc. But I never really, or rather, I had very limited time to actually sit back and review the numbers and actually ask, critical questions like, hold on, it's like, you say we want to get to this amount of revenue, but we're planning this level of capital investment, or we're planning this level of staffing. Like, these things don't necessarily triangulate very well. Like, for me was like, a shortcoming. And I realized, like, if I could automate sort of a lot of the, let's say the data coming in, at least, a lot of the, let's call it the easy stuff, the workhorse stuff. If I could automate a lot of this workhorse slog work, this would enable me then to actually perform at a higher level. And that was sort of the goal. I have an affinity for systems. I can be that guy for Woolworths that actually can enable this across the business. And it was really just around like a career conversation with at that time, who was the CFO of Woolworths South Africa. Yeah, we had a conversation about it, and he thought it would be a brilliant idea, given that I come from a finance background, worked in the business. I have the analyst skills. If I can combine that with the technology side and like just automate these things, and produce like better outcome, like better analytics, better reporting, etc., it will help them make better decisions. He bought into that idea. I bought into this idea. I thought it was an awesome idea. And then I kind of like pivoted at that point. I made the decision, okay, I'm going to become although my title at that time was like BI process analyst, but it was really around focusing on like enabling now the rest of finance to raise their game to become better. And I think that was what we were trying to achieve at Woolworths at the time.
And at that point, what did you feel you were leaving behind? What was your career path?
Yeah.
Your default career path. Where was that heading? And what did you feel at this moment? Was it a risk or was it a no-brainer? How did that process unfold?
I think for me it was a risk for sure, but I never understood the risk I was taking, let's put it that way, or the pivot that I was actually stepping into. In my mind, like if I stayed as an analyst, I could have eventually be promoted to a head of finance, from a head of finance to a sort of like a CFO role, because that was sort of like the next step above that. And then from there, basically CFO for the SA, and then you become group CFO eventually. It's sort of a longish path, but like traditional steps. There's like, and a senior analyst or financial manager, head of finance, CFO, etc. going up. I think with this, when I made this pivot, I realized I was stepping away from that pathway, but I did not anticipate that it would be. I always thought in my mind, like at some point I could go back to becoming an analyst, because it was still fairly early in my career at that time. It was about 10 years ago now, I would say. It feels like 10 years ago. I think it was about 10 years ago. I always felt like I could go back into that path, and sort of with the skills that I've learned now, being sort of in the PI process analyst space, it should be easy to transition back and then sort of follow that pathway. So I've never really thought about moving away from, or I always thought at some point I would go back into becoming an analyst. It never worked that way, of course, because that's why I'm here.
Okay, and let's just backtrack a little bit. So you got to this pivotal point. What had happened before in your career? Just talk us through quickly. What had you done before that, and becoming a CA, and what opportunities did you work on or go through in that period, and then getting to this pivotal point?
Yeah. So I spoke about like my affinity to systems, and that I think it stems a lot from my experience in articles. So I did articles at a big four firm, PwC, and the Cape Town office, and we had an opportunity, like each year they would take a bunch of article clerks, or few of us actually, and they would give us the opportunity to do both IT audit and financial audit. And my experience with being exposed to IT audit, and also working with people who are not accountants, so like these are information systems analysts, these are programmers, computer science background people, project managers, etc. Like my exposure to them has sort of given me insight to this new world about what is capable, or what is the potential or the opportunities out there with working with technology, and how you can use technology to advance your skill sets and your goals in your career. And through that exposure, sort of, I've always been, I think, I've always sort of had, like I said, I've always had an affinity for systems because of that exposure. Once I was done with articles at PwC, I stayed on a bit as an IT audit manager for a while, for about 1.5 years, before I decided, you know what, I don't want to be in the audit world. I actually want to work in corporate. I got an opportunity at Woolworths where I became a financial analyst. And as a financial analyst, like my primary function at that time was really just like budgets, forecasts, month-end reporting, and then doing a lot of like investment cases, funny enough. So like I was fortunate to put in a division in Woolworths where I had to do a lot of analysis on business cases or investment cases, where it's like the business, we want to invest in this project, how viable is it? Then you got to do like this cash flow analysis, and like use time value of money, etc., to like to estimate whether the cash flows will be sufficient to pay off what we're going to actually invest in the business. So I spent a lot of time doing that, and in that environment, I got exposure to doing a lot of complex financial models, which for me I always found interesting, and I've developed a little bit of passion for it, because it was like, you understanding what drives the business, what drives value in the business, how do you drive revenue, how do you bring down expenses, if you do X, what does that do to Y? So you're starting to triangulate the different operations in the business and understand how each lever, if you pull one lever, what does that do downstream, etc. So you get to understand that from a broad perspective, which I found quite fascinating.
Brilliant. And so, Yaseen, were you always on these? So you are a specialist on enterprise performance management tools. In fact, one of the brands I think you work on is Anaplan.
Yes.
But did you start this work on Anaplan, or did you work like the rest of us did in Excel and Power BI and Click and all these other tools? Just talk us through the different tools that you've used, and at what stage did you go up into this higher category of tools? And what are those tools? Maybe explain to us what those tools do and versus what Excel does.
Yeah, sure. I think first and foremost, I must say that Excel today versus Excel 10 years ago, completely different tools. But I digress. I started like with most, I think CAs or accountants or FMs. I started with Excel as well. And because I was forced almost, I would say forced sounds such a bad word, but because I had to start building complex models within Excel, let's put it that way, you hit quickly limitations in terms of what Excel is capable of. Like a typical thing, like Excel gives you 1 million lines, but like you try using 1 million lines, and then you tell me whether you can open up that workbook again tomorrow. So those are sort of the challenges that I had to deal with. And I wasn't aware of tools like Anaplan, as an example, at this point in my career. For me, the traditional next step, because we were using still at that time an older version of Excel, like we never had Power Query capabilities, etc. I had to engage a lot with data, with the data teams, to actually just build these like sort of like data sets for me, or for finance for that matter, sort of curated data that's usable for us in Excel, and then from there you can actually you can continue with your modeling. A lot of time is spent in Excel at the first part of my career. I think when I made that pivot, when I spoke about earlier, when I made that pivot to become like a BI process analyst, that's when I got exposure to things like Hyperion and Click. So Hyperion is sort of like the EPM tool that sort of well integrated with Oracle. So it made sense, obviously, with that. But I used a very older version of Hyperion, but I mean, it still made sense to actually use Hyperion. My exposure to Hyperion was really around like, I got exposure to the code that's written at the back end to like see, okay, how we pull this data and how we actually build models within Hyperion. And we had like data specialists or Hyperion specialists working at Woolworths. And I learned from them on terms of like how to build these things. I think with the one clear thing that I had advantage versus, let's say, someone who's purely from a computer program background, is that I understood what the business needed, whether it's finance or whether it's commercial side of the business, in terms of what is the outcome we're trying to achieve. So in terms of directing or steering that build, let's call it like that, in terms of if you build something new, like steering that in the right direction, I was better placed to then obviously guide that to make sure that we work in that direction. What I found quite useful or quite powerful, it was really around the integration of financial results into one platform. So you could pull data in from these Excel templates. We used to pull these Excel templates out for the teams, and you could pull data from these Excel templates into Hyperion, and Hyperion could consolidate all the for both reporting on historical data and for reporting on future numbers, like your planning numbers, so your budgets, your 3-year plans, your forecasts, etc. So it is very good at consolidating all that results, and it's also easy for end users to access those results. So at any given point in time, like any of the analysts or any of the financial managers or head of finances could open up Excel or open up Hyperion, connect to the data. If they use Excel, they could connect directly to Hyperion and just extract the data sort of into an Excel file, and it would all be there for them. And from there, they can then do what they need to do further analysis.
So Hyperion was your single version of the truth, essentially, is what you're saying. You pulled data into it, you consolidated it, you applied some rules, And then when users wanted to analyze, they would go back to Hyperion and pull this clean data that had been validated, and you knew balance back to your general ledger and your bank statement ultimately. So there was integrity in that data. Just help me, was it Hyperion consolidation or the S-based multidimensional?
It was the S-based
version?
S-based multi-dimension.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, that makes sense. So that's more of an analysis type of engine that can analyze by customer, by product, by whatever.
Yes. On that point where we spoke about data integrity and that, I think one of the important things for us was, and given also my background in IT audit, understanding the value of, or the importance rather, of reconciling data between systems. So between our data warehouse, between Hyperion, between our Oracle financial system, between point of sale, etc., we used to have these daily and weekly reconciliations running to make sure that the data all
Everything's
tying up here.
Yeah. You used a lovely word earlier, triangulate the data. So that's a big part, I guess, of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
With all these recons and all these different systems and the different views that you're trying to generate for different purposes, this triangulation of data is critical.
Yeah.
And it's what leads to that single version of trusted data that finance wants to use in their analyses and their reporting.
Yes.
You touched on 3 different tools there. We spoke about Excel, which is the go-to. Everybody in finance has to know Excel. That's a given. Right?
Yeah.
You spoke about BI tools, Click, and I think you mentioned Power BI. And then you've got this other category, Anaplan and Hyperion. Are you able to, and it's a very difficult topic and not many people can explain it, and we confuse each other when we try and explain it. But do you want to have a go at just explaining the difference between a BI tool and an enterprise performance management tool?
I'll give it my definition.
I'll pay you danger pay.
Danger pay. Okay, awesome. I'll give my definition of how I see these differences. So hopefully it will demystify. So a BI tool, I think the prime objective or the goal of a BI tool is to visualize data in a format that's easy to read and for businesses to make better decisions of that information, right? It's good at producing graphs, like I said, visualization of data to actually support business decisions. That for me is a business BI tool.
And typically historical data, doesn't have to be, but
it doesn't have to be. It's typically historical data. Although I would say that you could, the nice thing about BI tools is it sits on top of you can put it on top of anything else. So if it even if it's planning related data, you could use BI to sort of visualize that data, etc. To get reporting on KPIs, etc. All those things that's what BI tool is good at. It's that front end presentation that it brings.
Okay, and then EPM tools, enterprise performance management, sometimes known as corporate performance management tools. Sometimes these days they talk FP&A tools.
Yeah.
Tell us what goes on inside those tools.
Yeah. So enterprise performance management tools, I think the name says a lot into it. So it is really there to manage the performance of the business. And this comes down to understanding the drivers and how they connect with the financial outcomes of the business. So EPM is really the mechanics behind understanding how drivers and financial results or the financial performance of a company is connected to each other. Using that understanding when you plan for the future, your budget or your forecast, etc., understand which drivers you need to pull to get the right financial performance result you want. I think that's for me is the key thing. And both for EPM, it's both understanding the history. So what is historically your financial results and what are the drivers that relate to those financial results? And then also for future, what you need to plan from your drivers in order to get the financial performance results you want going forward.
And these EPM tools give you the ability to take historical data and project it forward. They give you workflows typically so that you can tell people or ask people for information. Remember, data that's in the future is largely in people's heads, and you've got to try and get that data out of their heads, what they're projecting. And these tools workflow schedules out to everybody, collect the data, make sure the assumptions are consistent, there's standard rates, foreign exchange, everyone's using the same rates, everyone's using the same
consistent methodology.
inflation rates. It's all of that stuff that's looking at the future picture. That's why it's planning data. But it's also triangulating the history and the future all into one go so that you can look at actual versus forecast and where you're heading for the financial year. And not just for financial purposes, but if you take EPM to its nth degree, the HR community can use it for workforce planning, right?
Yes.
And they can, the sales and marketing people can look where their next campaign and where the sales are going to come from. And the supply chain can see what demand is coming from the business and match that demand with, supply, be it services or materials.
Yeah, I think the important thing there is it's integrating sort of, it's like this non-silo type reporting. It's really around integrating the entire business and how these things are all connected in terms of the performance of the business and how each area of the business or function of the business actually strives towards meeting that performance target. The other thing I think that from an EPM perspective, what I have in my head is always like, it's supposed to, the outcome that you want to also meet is like, it's to enhance making better decisions faster. Like if you're going to implement an EPM tool, that should be one of your goals. It's like, I need to be able, the results that's being produced from using EPM should allow businesses to make better decisions faster.